Welcome back to Blooming Resistance, where we trace the roots of courage, past and present, and celebrate the movement blooming in our time. I'm Kate, and today we're talking about democracy. And not as an abstract idea, but as something living, something breathing, and something under threat. Across the country, voting rights are under siege and on the line once again. And it's not just about voter ID laws or mail-in ballots. State legislatures are redrawing the very maps that decide who has power. In Texas, lawmakers have pushed forward aggressive redistricting plans that critics say are gerrymandered to favor one party, diluting the voting power of Black and Latino communities. These maps can lock in political advantage for decades, long before voters even step into the booth. And over in California, all eyes are on Proposition 50, a ballot measure heading to voters this November 4th that could reshape what states' congressional districts through the rest of the decade look like. Supporters say it's temporary, a defensive move, a way to level the playing field after Texas. Critics warn it's a power grab. Either way, Prop 50 is more than a local vote. It's become a national test of how far states will go to bend or defend democracy's lines. And in Utah, state leaders are moving quickly to redraw districts. Critics argue the process lacks transparency and disproportionately favors certain communities, again, threatening fair representation. And these examples show that the fight over voting rights isn't only about casting a ballot. It's about who gets to shape the rules and the very maps that determine political power. Protests like the No Kings March reminds us that this isn't abstract. Ordinary people are standing up to say no one is above the law and democracy doesn't belong to kings. The march wasn't just about one political leader or one election. It's about power, about accountability, and about the future of representation. And to understand what's happening right now, the maps, the court cases, the protests, we have to dig deep. Because the struggle over voting rights isn't new. It's as old as American democracy itself. So let's go back to the first time America tried to rebuild itself. In the ashes of the Civil War, between 1865 and 1870, 3 amendments reshaped the Constitution, and for a moment redefined what freedom could mean. The 13th Amendment, ratified in 1865, abolished slavery. But not entirely. It ended slavery and involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime. The exception became a loophole, later used to justify the mass incarceration of Black Americans, effectively continuing forced labor through prisons and convict leasing. The 14th Amendment, ratified in 1868, established birthright citizenship and guaranteed equal protection of the laws. This was revolutionary. It meant that states could no longer deny basic rights on the basis of race. But white supremacists in power found new ways to interpret and restrict those protections. The 15th Amendment, ratified in 1870, declared that the right to vote could not be denied or abridged on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Together, these are called the Reconstruction Amendments, a constitutional rebirth that aimed to bring equality and democracy to life for millions of newly freed people. And for a short, remarkable time, it worked. During the Reconstruction, Black men registered to vote in huge numbers. They were elected to local offices, school boards, state legislatures, even to Congress. In 1870, Hiram Revels of Mississippi became the first Black U.S. senator. But the backlash came swiftly. By the late 1880s, white supremacist violence, from the Ku Klux Klan to state militias, destroyed Reconstruction governments. Southern states began writing new constitutions to circumvent the 15th Amendment. They created poll taxes, forcing people to pay to vote. They imposed literacy tests, requiring voters to interpret obscure sections of the Constitution. They added understanding clauses, allowing white election officials to decide who was qualified. And they passed grandfather clauses, letting white voters skip those tests if their grandfathers had voted, a loophole that excluded almost all Black citizens. By 1900, Black voter registration in states like Louisiana dropped from over 130,000 to fewer than 5,000. Jim Crow wasn't just segregation, it was a system of racial control built on silencing the black vote. It was enforced by law, by intimidation, and by violence. Fast forward to the 1950s and 60s when a new generation of activists took up the fight for full citizenship. One of them was Fannie Lou Hamer, a sharecropper from Ruleville, Mississippi. She was fired from her job, beaten in jail, and nearly killed for trying to register to vote. But she never gave up. In 1964, she helped found the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, which challenged the all-white Mississippi delegation at the Democratic National Convention. Her televised testimony riveted the nation. She looked straight into the camera and said, "All of this on account of who we want to register, to become first-class citizens." Her courage exposed the brutality of Jim Crow to the world. Another young leader, John Lewis, became the embodiment of nonviolent resistance. As a founder of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or the SNCC, Lewis led voter registration drives, sit-ins, and freedom rides, facing arrests and beatings at nearly every turn. On March 7, 1965, Lewis and hundreds of marchers attempted to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, demanding the right to vote. They were met by state troopers who attacked them with clubs and tear gas, and television cameras captured everything. The world saw peaceful citizens beaten for daring to vote, and that day became known as Bloody Sunday, and it changed history. Just months later, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act of 1965 into law, one of the most powerful civil rights laws in American history. And here's what it did. Section 2 banned any voting practice that discriminated on the basis of race, color, or language minority status nationwide. Section 4 and Section 5 established pre-clearance, meaning states with counties with histories of racial discrimination in voting had to get federal approval before elections were fair. It authorized the federal government to send examiners and observers to ensure elections were fair. It outlawed literacy tests, poll taxes, and other racially biased qualifications. And it worked. Within a few years, voter registration in the South skyrocketed. Black citizens who had been shut out for generations were voting and running for office. The Voting Rights Act transformed the political landscape for the South and the nation. It was the single most effective piece of civil rights legislation in American history. But decades later, the protections of the Voting Rights Act were slowly weakened. In 2013, the Supreme Court's Shelby County v. Holder decision struck down the pre-clearance formula. That ruling said, in effect, that because racism in voting was no longer widespread, federal oversight was no longer necessary. And within hours, literally hours, several states moved to enact new restrictive laws. Polling places were closed in Black neighborhoods, voter ID laws and registration purges surged. The pattern was clear. The tactics had changed, but the intent had not. And now in 2025, just last week, the Supreme Court has heard Louisiana v. Calais, which challenges the constitutionality of Section 2, the last major piece of the Voting Rights Act still protecting against racial discrimination. If Section 2 is dismantled, it could leave voters of color almost defenseless against gerrymandering and suppression at the state level. The right to vote was not given freely. It was won through struggle, through sacrifice, through unimaginable courage. Each generation has had to defend it from those who would take it away. This isn't just a legal debate or a coincidence, it's a reckoning. It's a continuation of a centuries-long struggle for who counts. Today, voter suppression doesn't always look like poll taxes or literacy tests, but it's still here, just more sophisticated. States are reducing early voting days, limiting ballot drop boxes, imposing strict voter ID laws, and even criminalizing things like giving water to people waiting in line to vote. In Georgia, lines in majority Black precincts can stretch for hours, while in nearby white suburbs, people are in and out in 15 minutes. In Florida and in Texas, laws have made it harder for formerly incarcerated people to regain their right to vote. It's the same playbook with different tools. Democracy doesn't protect itself. It relies on people who refuse to give up on it. And this brings us to the No Kings protest. It wasn't about one politician. It was about the principle that power must serve the people. Demonstrators across the country rallied under the slogan "No Kings" in response to both the Supreme Court's ethics scandals and the growing sense that our democratic systems are being captured by a small elite. The phrase "No Kings" isn't about monarchy. It's about accountability. It's a demand that power remain with the people, not with unchecked courts or billionaire donors or partisan map drawers. It's the same spirit that animated the civil rights marches of the 1960s, just in a new era, facing new threats. It reminds everyone that democracy isn't inherited, it's tended, like a garden that can wither if ignored. And here's how you can be part of that work, moving from concern to action right now. Check your voter registration, go to your state's election website, or use a national tool like canivote.org and verify 1, that you're registered, 2, your address is correct, 3, your polling place is accurate, and 4, you're flagged for any special conditions like mail-in voting or overseas voting. Register others. Talk with friends, family, neighbors, especially those in underrepresented communities. Offer to walk them through registration or check for them. A peer-to-peer invite often matters. Volunteer as poll workers or election assistants. Local election offices need help in staffing polling places, helping multilingual voters, managing check-in lines, or monitoring drop boxes. Your service helps make voting smooth and fair. You can host or join a voter education event, whether at your church, campus, community center, or online. Teach people about how redistricting works, how maps affect their votes, what changes to expect. Bring real stories. Support organizations defending voting rights. Groups like Black Voters Matter, Vote Riders, League of Women Votes, Common Cause, and the NAACP Legal Defense Fund are in the legal trenches and are on the ground. They need both volunteers and financial support. Stay legally informed. The judicial branch is actively deciding the rules of the game. Such is the fate of Section 2. Know when key decisions are coming and share them. Turn advocacy into habit. Voting isn't a one-day event. Once you've cast your ballot, stay engaged. Join community groups, monitor future redistricting efforts, ask your state legislators about transparency and map making. The protection of democracy is long-term. And use consumer power. Publicly support businesses that commit to fair democracy and speak out against those that fund suppression efforts. Community norms matter. When democracy works, everyone votes. When democracy is threatened, we must step up. Let's protect, let's expand, and let's deepen our right and not take it for granted. And even in the midst of all of these challenges, there are bright spots. In a new nationwide effort, Martin Luther King III and Mi Familia Vota teamed up to launch the Black-Brown Civic Engagement Campaign across 10 key states, including Texas, Georgia, Arizona, and California. The goal is to build solidarity and register Black and Latino voters in the face of escalating redistricting and voter suppression threats. In New York, the state's highest court unanimously upheld a law that moves many local elections to even-numbered years, aligning them with statewide and federal races to boost turnout. Advocates have hailed this a victory for democracy. And these aren't just bullet points. They are proof that local action and legal attention are moving the needle. From big picture reform to grassroots organizing, people everywhere are stepping in. Each small victory is a bloom, proof that persistence works. Remember, democracy isn't something we inherit. It's something we build over and over and over again. And right now, it's under construction. So stay informed, stay engaged, and keep blooming, because resistance at its core is an act of hope. I'm Kate, and this has been Blooming Resistance. I'll see you next time.